Good morning, folks. My name is A.J. Bernard. I'm the pastor at Spring Grove and Center United Methodist Churches in Washington Courthouse, Ohio. This morning, we're going to be looking at the 20th chapter of the book of John for very important reasons. Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene had came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." So Peter went out with the other disciple, and they were going to the tomb. Both of them were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. And stooping to look in, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, and following him, and went into the tomb. And he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth upon which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. And the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture, that he must rise from the dead. The disciples went back to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. And as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. And they said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she did not know it was Jesus. And Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord," and that he had said these things to her. Please forgive me, folks, for being emotional. But this text warrants it. This text warrants it. There's so much here. There's so much here. I want to grab one interesting little piece of information, and then I'm just going to ramble if you don't mind. Jesus said to her, "Mary," and she said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Now, the Greek word here is ibrais, or ibraisti, which is a transliteration of the word Hebrew. Ivrit is the Hebrew word Hebrew. But she says in Aramaic or in Hebrew, Rabboni, which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me." Now, this word cling gets a lot of attention. It's the Greek word hapto, and it does mean touch. The King James Version does properly translate it as touch. But let's look at what it also means. Lunita, the one of the foremost Greek lexicons in the world, is to hold on to retain in the hand, to seize. Here, another lexicon says to fasten, to bind to, having fastened. Dictionary of Biblical Literature, Greek, says to start a fire, to hold on to touch, to harm. Jesus wasn't saying, don't touch me. No power in the world could have kept Mary from touching him at that moment. No power in the world could have kept Mary from throwing herself on his neck and holding him with all her might. He wasn't saying, don't touch me. He was saying, you have to let me go sometime. You can't keep holding on to me. You can't cling to me. You can't fasten to me like this. I have stuff to do. You have to let go of me. I'm so sorry, folks. No power in the world could possibly have kept Mary from touching him at that moment. I'm going to pause the video and go deal with this mess. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. So, this text is so powerful. It's so beautiful. I hope you understand. I hope you see what I'm looking at. You see, so it's my opinion that Jesus was crucified on Thursday. Friday and Saturday were both Sabbath days. Now, how does that happen? When it's Passover week, you can have an additional high holy day or an additional Sabbath day during the week. I think that Friday and Saturday were both Sabbath days, days in which the Jews were not allowed to touch a dead body, and that they had to maintain cleanliness. And so the very first day that it was possible for the women to go to the tomb would have been Sunday, which was not a Sabbath day. I think that they went as soon as they possibly could, because they loved him, because they were devoted to him, because they wanted to do this one final duty for their Lord and Master. But Jesus is crucified on Thursday. He's in the grave Thursday night. He's in the grave all day Friday. He's in the grave Friday night. He's in the grave all day Saturday. He's in the grave Saturday night. He rises after sunrise on Sunday. Now, I know that's 2.5 days, right? But what does the scripture say? The scripture says that he will rise on the third day, not after the third day. So anyone looking for a full 72 hours is missing a part of scripture. Jesus rises from the dead on the third day. So the women go to the tomb to anoint him, and they find the stone rolled away, and they're terrified. So they go back and they get Peter and John, and Peter and John run to the tomb, and the women follow. Peter and John look in, but don't go into the tomb, and they see the grave clothes folded up. Gosh, that was what really set me off, wasn't it? So let's scroll back up here, and I will try to keep it together for you. Here. There it is. Then Simon Peter came, and following him went into the tomb, and saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Now we're going to make some special highlights here. All around the world there are cultures and customs. I'm so sorry. Cultures and customs for communicating with your servants, right? And I don't mean servants in a negative way. I'm talking about wait staff in a restaurant or servants in a mansion or whatever. If when I was in Germany, for example, when I was at a restaurant, a German restaurant, if a waitress would come by and she would find my plate with food still on it, but me not sitting there, and my fork and my knife crossed over the middle of the plate, she would leave the plate alone. She would know that I had gotten up to go to the restroom, or that I was talking to someone somewhere else or something, but that I was coming back. But if she finds both my fork and my knife parallel on the plate, she'll take it away, regardless of how much food is on there, because that's the sign. The fork and the knife parallel on the plate, and that's the sign that I'm done. In a similar way, when a Jewish noble had eaten, if he when he finishes eating, he would take his napkin, he would wipe his face, and he would throw the napkin onto the plate. Just throw it, just randomly throw it. And he would get up and leave, and the servants would come by, and they would see that the napkin was laying chaotically on the plate, or chaotically next to the plate, or whatever, and they would say that the master is done, because that's the symbol. But if the napkin, God bless it, if the napkin is folded up neatly next to the plate, folks, the servants would leave the meal on the table. Why? Because the master is coming back. Hallelujah. Because the master is coming back. So I'm going to say now that people don't normally rise from the dead. It's an incredibly rare thing in all of history, and most of those are relegated to Bible times. Now, I've heard stories, I've heard miracles of people in Africa and in Asia being raised from the dead in the name of Christ, and these are miracles that you can believe or you can discount. I mean, I tend to believe them because I believe that God is a miracle working God. But we'll talk about miracles another time. People don't normally rise from the dead, and so when we talk about Christ, who said, "I'm going to go to Jerusalem, I'm going to be killed, I'm going to rise from the dead," and his disciples didn't understand that. But you can read it in the Gospels. He predicted his death several times. It doesn't make sense to us, and that's what I want to get to. It doesn't make sense to us, but it doesn't have to. There's a lot that we, with our finite human minds, cannot and will not ever understand. There's deep facts of science, deep ideas of philosophy, deep mathematical truths that we may never fully grasp. So it's okay, even in those disciplines, to say that there are things that we don't or will not understand. Or that we might understand them someday, but we don't understand them now, I guess. I don't understand how Christ came back from the dead. But I do know that he did. How do I know that? Because the apostles who were about to scatter. Their movement was broken. Jesus dies on the cross. The apostles go into hiding. The Romans are searching for them. They're getting ready to scatter, to flee to all parts of the world because they don't want to die on their own crosses. These same men, then see the risen Lord. They touch him. They eat with him. They talk with him. They see him. And in the next 40 days, they are changed forever. Now, some people will certainly die for what they believe, right? You have Muslim martyrs blowing themselves up on British buses all the time. And it's tragic. It's horrible. They're dying for what they have been told. They're dying for what they have not seen, but what they have heard. And if I were to, find myself in North Korea and someone would say, "Are you a Christian?" And I would say, "Yes." They would say, "Oh, good, we're going to kill you for being a Christian," and that happens in North Korea. If I would die as a martyr for my faith, it wouldn't be evidence of anything, right? It would mean that I sincerely believed and that North Koreans are cruel. But other than that, it wouldn't be evidence that Christ had risen. Except that these men aren't dying for what they heard. These men aren't dying because somebody told them that Jesus rose from the dead. These men ate with him. These men touched him. These men talked to him. These men who had spent 3 years with him knew him intimately, knew him very, very well. They could not be fooled. They knew him as a dear friend. They interacted with him. And in their interactions, in this span of 40 days, in their interactions with him after the resurrection, they grew bold. And they began to preach. They began to preach the risen Christ. Now, if it was a lie, if it was a hoax, if it was not true, how many of them do you think would have held to that lie all the way to their own graves? Not a single one of them. If it's a lie, it's not worth dying for. If it's a lie, save your own skin. But if it is true, dearly beloved, if it is true, it is the most important fact in human history. And so Peter is caught by the Romans and convicted of being a Christian. I mean, pretty easy to convict Peter of being a Christian, right? And his wife is crucified in front of him. And all the while, she's hanging on her cross in absolute agony. He doesn't say, "I love you, darling." He doesn't say, "Remember our children, they love you." He says, "Oh, thou beloved, remember Christ." When she's dead, Peter himself is crucified, but he doesn't believe that he's worthy to be crucified in the same way that Jesus was. So he's crucified upside down, head downward. And all he had to do to save himself, to save his wife, all he had to do was say, "No, look, it was a lie. We made it up." Now, some of the apostles were martyred. Some of them were not. And Josh McDowell has done the definitive work on this. Not Josh, Sean. Dr. Sean McDowell has done the definitive work on this. Some of them were martyred. Some of them were not. Thomas, for example, goes to India on a missionary trip. And I believe Thomas dies there of old age, teaching the people in India. But if all you had to do to escape your own death was to deny this thing that you had been saying, well, then you would deny it. Unless it's true. So I don't understand the resurrection. There's a lot about it that I don't know. But I do know that it is absolutely true. God bless.